I know her as Qualeisha. I know her as Lily. I know her as we in the same house, in the same bed. That's what I know her as. All that friend stuff, I don't care about none of that. That was my sister. That was my baby.
See, if you met Lily, you instantly loved her. And she was such a jokester, you know. She liked to laugh, and she always cracking jokes on me.
It starts with silence, the kind that fills empty streets at night when almost everything in the city has gone still. But in the early hours of April 8th, 2026, that silence in a residential part of Atlanta was broken by something unmistakable: gunfire. When officers arrived just after 1:23 a.m., they were responding to what initially sounded like a standard emergency call. But what they found on arrival quickly changed the weight of the situation. A single SUV sat in the roadway. No movement, no visible commotion, just a vehicle that seemed to have come to a stop in the middle of everything. Inside, investigators located 36-year-old Qualeisha Barnes, known publicly as Siditty, unresponsive in the driver's seat after being struck by multiple gunshots. Police later confirmed she was pronounced dead at the scene. Almost immediately, detectives began noticing what was missing just as much as what was present. There was no clear sign of a robbery, no obvious struggle outside the vehicle, and no immediate indication of how long the car had been parked there before the shooting occurred. Early statements from investigators suggested the shots were fired from outside the vehicle, with multiple rounds hitting the SUV before the attacker disappeared into the night. And then came the detail that deepened the impact of the case even further. Barnes was 14 weeks pregnant at the time of her death, according to her family. That single fact reshaped the entire tone of the investigation.
Pregnant rapper from Detroit is murdered in Atlanta. She was shot 4 times in the face this week, and her family tells us they have a good idea why she was targeted and killed. Know her as Qualeisha Barnes. Followers of Detroit and Atlanta hip-hop know her as Siditty.
Probably because I know I'm worth a milli.
Qualeisha and her family are all from Southwest Detroit. She's been in Atlanta for a decade. The 36-year-old was 14 weeks pregnant, shot 4 times in the face in the middle of the night while in a car in Atlanta this week.
I heard gunshots, like maybe 4 or 5 gunshots, and then a car, Honda, just flew up the street. Like 20, 30 minutes later, the cops everywhere.
Atlanta police say it looks like someone shot through the windshield and drove off. They're using security video to piece it all together. Qualeisha's family says she was targeted because she was pregnant.
We've got a general idea of the route that was taken, so we're going to have to backtrack some information to figure out the exact circumstance, if anybody was with her or not.
On top of her music, Qualeisha was 2 semesters out from earning a nursing degree that will never be. Family, though, says they're going to get whoever did this.
What might have been viewed as just another late-night homicide suddenly became something far more urgent and far more personal for those left behind. At this stage, police have made one thing clear. They are still trying to reconstruct the moments leading up to the shooting, who she may have encountered, where she had been earlier, and whether someone was already waiting for her when she arrived at that location. Because right now, the crime itself is visible, but the path that led to it is still missing. Before we get into the details, we'd like to welcome you to our channel, True Crime Diaries, a place where we uncover shocking cases, unsolved mysteries, and real-life crimes. From headlines to hidden details, we break it all down so you know what really happened. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to be the first to know when a new case drops. These are real people, real tragedies, and lessons we can't ignore. Share this video, it could save a life. Now let's get into it. To understand what was lost that night, you have to step away from the crime scene and look at the life that existed before it. Qualeisha Barnes was 36 years old, but the way those closest to her describe her, she was still very much in the middle of becoming who she wanted to be. She grew up in Detroit, a city known for shaping resilience, and later relocated to Atlanta, where she spent nearly a decade building her own path. Her life didn't follow just one direction. It moved in multiple lanes at once. On one side, there was music. Under the name Siditty, she expressed herself creatively, building an identity that reflected confidence and individuality. On another, there was something more structured and long-term, a commitment to healthcare. At the time of her death, she was studying to become a nurse and was close to completing her degree. According to her family, she had recently made the dean's list and had only a short time left before finishing school. That milestone wasn't just academic. It represented years of effort, discipline, and a clear vision for her future. But even that wasn't the full picture. She was also running her own business, an online boutique, balancing entrepreneurship alongside school and music. It was the kind of workload that reflects someone who isn't waiting for opportunities, but actively creating them. And then there's how her family remembers her. Not through achievements, but through presence. They called her Lily. They described someone who laughed easily, joked often, and brought energy into any room she entered. A personality that didn't feel distant or complicated, just real, familiar, and deeply loved. Those personal details matter, because they shift the story away from headlines and back towards something human.
Probably because I know I'm worth a million.
You may know her by her stage name, Siditty.
The only Diddy in my city with a lit wrist.
But those closest to her know her as a daughter and a sister.
I know her as Qualeisha. I know her as Lily. I know her as we in the same house, in the same bed. That's what I know her as. All that friend stuff, I don't care about none of that. That was my sister. That was my baby.
Give us the strength that we need to survive.
Hand in prayer, the family of Qualeisha Barnes asked God for strength while coming to terms with her senseless killing. And it's moments like this that are helping them deal with her death.
Generally, if you met Lily, you instantly loved her. And she was such a jokester, you know. She liked to laugh, and she always cracking jokes on me.
Barnes's mom, Francine Lopez Stewart, says her rap name fits her perfectly.
She loved makeup. She loved dressing up. She loved beauty. So, and she was Siditty.
But Barnes wasn't just a rapper. She was also an aspiring nurse.
She wasn't just building a career. She was building a life. A life that included plans, goals, and responsibilities still unfolding. And at the time everything was taken from her, she was also preparing for something else entirely, becoming a mother. That detail doesn't just add to the tragedy. It changes the scale of what was lost. Every investigation eventually reaches a point where the crime itself is no longer the hardest part to understand. It's the hours before it that become the real mystery. In the case of Qualeisha Barnes, that gap begins in the late night hours of April 7th and stretches into the early morning of April 8th, 2026. And right now, that window is still largely unaccounted for. According to investigators, one of the first challenges in the case is establishing where she was immediately before arriving at the location where she was later found. No confirmed public record of her final stop before the shooting. No verified timeline of her last known meeting. No released information about who she may have been communicating with that night. Law enforcement has stated that they are actively working to retrace her movements leading up to the incident, using both digital evidence and surveillance footage. This phase is critical because it determines whether she arrived alone or was already being followed. What is confirmed is what happens at the endpoint of that timeline. By around 1:23 a.m., her vehicle was discovered at rest on a street in Atlanta. But what investigators still do not publicly know is how long the SUV had been parked there, whether it stopped voluntarily or unexpectedly, whether another vehicle was nearby at the time of arrival. That missing context is what makes the case difficult to reconstruct. Because in most homicide investigations, the first 10 to 30 minutes before an attack often hold the most important clues. At the center of the timeline mystery is one key question. Was she already there waiting? Or did the attacker arrive after her? Each possibility creates a completely different investigative direction. If she arrived first, it suggests a potential planned meeting or setup. If someone arrived after, it suggests surveillance or tracking. If both arrived at the same time, it suggests a targeted confrontation. But at this stage, none of these scenarios have been confirmed. Police have confirmed they are reviewing multiple sources of evidence to rebuild the timeline. Surveillance footage from surrounding areas, digital communication records, witness statements from nearby residents, vehicle movement tracking where available. These are being used to answer three core questions. When did she arrive at that location? Was anyone already there? Did another vehicle leave shortly after the shooting? Why does timeline matter so much? In cases like this, the timeline before the incident often reveals more than the scene itself. Because once detectives establish the last known movement, the final communication, and the moment of arrival, the suspect pool often narrows dramatically. But until that gap is filled, the investigation remains in its most uncertain stage. Right now, the crime has a location. It has a time. It even has a method. But it still doesn't have a fully reconstructed lead-up. And in a case like this, that missing stretch of time isn't just a detail. It's the difference between what is known and what is still waiting to be discovered. When the scene is first processed, everything about it points to one thing. This was not a chaotic event. It was controlled, fast, and over almost as quickly as it began. But for investigators, that's where the real work starts, because a clean scene doesn't mean a simple case. In the hours and days after the shooting of Qualeisha Barnes, detectives in Atlanta began assembling the investigation piece by piece, treating every fragment of evidence as part of a larger puzzle. Surveillance becomes the first priority. One of the earliest confirmed steps in the investigation is the widespread collection of surveillance footage from the surrounding area. Police begin pulling video from residential doorbell cameras, nearby businesses, street-facing security systems. Their goal is not just to see the moment of the shooting, but to rebuild everything around it. They are looking for when the vehicle first appeared in the area, whether another car followed it, any person approaching or leaving the scene afterward. According to police updates, CCTV review is a central focus as investigators attempt to identify movement patterns before and after the shooting. The digital trail investigation. Alongside video evidence, detectives also shift toward digital reconstruction. This includes phone records, text messages, location history, social media activity prior to the incident. The purpose is simple but critical: to determine whether there was any communication that led her to that location. At this stage, investigators are trying to answer: did she plan to meet someone? Was she directed to that location? Or was she followed there unknowingly? No public conclusions from digital forensics have been released yet, meaning this part of the case remains under active analysis. Witness accounts and neighborhood reporting. In most homicide cases, witness statements help fill gaps that technology cannot. In this investigation, residents reported hearing gunfire in the early morning hours. Some accounts mention a vehicle leaving the area shortly afterward. Others describe police arriving within minutes of the shots. However, despite these early accounts, no witness has publicly identified a shooter. No official suspect description has been released. This suggests the attack happened quickly and without prolonged visibility, limiting what people nearby could actually see. Reconstructing the vehicle timeline. A major focus for detectives is the movement of the SUV itself. Investigators are working to determine when it entered the area, whether it stopped voluntarily or unexpectedly, whether it had been stationary for an extended period before the shooting. This matters because it directly affects how the case is interpreted. A short stop may suggest a chance encounter. A longer stop could suggest a planned meeting or waiting period. Right now, that distinction remains unresolved. Building the working theory file. Even without a suspect, detectives begin organizing evidence into structured categories. Confirmed physical evidence, scene, ballistics. Digital evidence, phone and data extraction. Visual evidence, CCTV footage under review. Human evidence, witness and family statements. Each category is being used to answer one central question: not just what happened, but how it was set in motion. Current investigative status. At this point in the case, no arrests have been made. No suspect has been publicly identified. Surveillance footage is still being reviewed. Digital analysis is ongoing. Motive has not been confirmed. Authorities have classified the case as an active homicide investigation and are continuing to urge anyone with information to come forward. From the outside, it may look like the investigation is stuck in silence, but in reality, it is still in motion, moving through footage, data, and testimony piece by piece. Because in cases like this, the breakthrough rarely comes from the scene itself. It comes from what connects everything around it. And somewhere in that connection, investigators believe the answer is already there. When investigators step back from a case like this, they don't begin with assumptions, they begin with patterns. And in the shooting of Qualeisha Barnes, the pattern is both clear and incomplete. A single vehicle, late night hours, multiple shots fired, a shooter who disappears almost immediately, and a victim who, according to police statements, appears to have been struck by gunfire fired from outside the car. From those confirmed facts, detectives begin separating what is known from what is still possible. Theory 1. A targeted encounter. This remains one of the strongest working possibilities based strictly on the scene dynamics. Nothing at the location suggests chaos or random violence. There are no reports of widespread disturbance, no evidence of a broader attack, and no indication of theft at the scene. Instead, what stands out is precision. The shooting occurs directly into a parked SUV. The attack is fast. The shooter leaves immediately. This kind of structure often leads investigators to consider whether the victim was specifically located or identified beforehand. However, despite how this theory aligns with the mechanics of the crime, no confirmed suspect or prior threat has been publicly identified. Theory 2. A planned meeting that turned deadly. Another possibility being explored through standard investigative procedure is whether Barnes may have been at the location intentionally. Police have confirmed they are still working to reconstruct her movements before the shooting, including reviewing surveillance and communication data to determine whether she arrived alone or to meet someone. Under this scenario, the timeline becomes critical. If she arrived first, she may have been waiting. If someone else arrived first, she may have walked into an existing situation. If both arrive close together, it could indicate a prearranged encounter gone wrong. At this stage, none of these conditions have been confirmed, but they remain central to the investigation. Theory 3. Multiple individuals involved. While police have not confirmed multiple suspects, this idea has surfaced through family statements and remains part of what investigators may need to verify or rule out. What supports the consideration of more than one person is not direct evidence, but structure, late-night timing, rapid execution of the shooting, immediate departure from the scene. These elements sometimes suggest coordination, but again, law enforcement has not publicly confirmed this angle, and no second suspect has been identified. Theory 4. Opportunistic violence. This is the least structured, but still considered in early-stage homicide investigations. It proposes that the shooting may not have required prior knowledge of the victim, but instead occurred due to an unexpected confrontation or momentary escalation. However, based on current reporting, no robbery has been confirmed, no struggle has been documented, no indication of random nearby violence has been reported. Because of that, this remains a lower probability explanation at this time. What all theories have in common? Despite their differences, every working theory in this case is built on the same foundation. The shooter approached from outside the vehicle. The attack was quick and deliberate in execution. The suspect fled before law enforcement arrived. No motive has been publicly confirmed. And that last point is what keeps every theory open. The reality of the case, right now. At this stage of the investigation, no arrest has been made. No suspect has been officially named. No confirmed motive has been released. Surveillance and digital evidence are still being reviewed, which means every theory remains exactly that, a framework built around incomplete information. In cases like this, theories don't exist to answer the story. They exist to organize the unknown, until evidence finally closes the gap between possibility and truth. And right now, that gap is still wide open. There are cases that end with arrests, courtroom testimonies, and final verdicts. And then there are cases like this, where everything important still feels like it's suspended in time. For investigators, the work continues in the background, reviewing footage, analyzing data, and following every lead that might finally connect the missing pieces. Police have confirmed the case remains an active homicide investigation, with no suspect publicly identified and no confirmed motive released. But for the people who knew Qualeisha Barnes, the investigation is not just about evidence. It's about absence. It's about the empty space left behind by someone who is still building her life, still studying, still creating, still planning what came next. She wasn't only known as Siditty, or defined by any single role she carried. She was a daughter, a student, a business owner, and someone who, by all accounts, was working toward a future she could see clearly. And now, All of those futures exist only in memory. What makes this case difficult to process is not just how it ended, but how suddenly it ended. There was no public warning, no confirmed explanation, no final message that could explain what led to that moment on a quiet Atlanta street. Just a vehicle, a few seconds of violence, and then silence. And in situations like this, the hardest truth isn't what investigators already know. It's what they still don't. Because until someone steps forward, or until evidence finally reveals what the cameras and timelines have not yet shown, the most important questions remain open, not just for detectives, but for a family still searching for answers and a story that hasn't reached its final chapter. And maybe that's why this case stays with people, because it reminds us how quickly everything can change and how fragile the line is between an ordinary night and a moment that alters everything forever. As this investigation continues, one thing remains unchanged. There are still more questions than answers. If there's anything this case reminds us, it's how quickly life can shift without warning, and how many stories are left unfinished when violence enters the picture. And while investigators continue their work, the hope from family and friends remains the same, that someone, somewhere, will come forward with a piece of information that finally brings clarity. If you have any information related to this case, authorities have urged the public to contact Atlanta police or Crime Stoppers anonymously, because sometimes even the smallest detail can change everything. And if you followed this story to the end, take a moment, not just to reflect on what happened, but to remember the person at the center of it. Not just how the story ended, but who she was before it ever became one. That concludes today's case, but the story doesn't end here. There are still countless voices unheard, stories hidden in the shadows, and truths yet to be uncovered. Here at True Crime Diaries, we are committed to digging deeper, presenting the facts, honoring the victims, and keeping their memories alive. If this story resonated with you, subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next case.